So, discipline is important for teaching how to live within the limits of a situation. But discipline doesn't necessarily mean reward or punishment. In fact, the word itself comes from the Latin word disciplina, which means to teach. So, how we choose to teach our children right from wrong, the importance of fulfilling their obligations, and accepting responsibility for their actions is going to have a lasting impact on us and on them. And we mentioned earlier that the dictator enforces the orders by doing or doling out the rewards and the punishment. He keeps the children in line with the threat of punishment if they misbehave and the promise of reward if they do what he wants them to do. And this system of reward and punishment may have been effective in older days when the world was ruled by kings and queens and emperors and everybody knew their place. But in a society of equals, it doesn't really work that well. So a reward is something out of the ordinary that the child likes. It's used either as a payment for past positive behavior or as a bribe to motivate future positive behavior. So there was a young man, and he spent a lot of his summers as a director at a boys' camp. And he considered himself a student of behavior modification at the time. So he decided to see if he could teach a cabin of campers to say thank you for the milk and cookies that he gave them at bedtime without outright asking them to say it. So on the first night, he passes out the goodies and observes as each camper took his hand out without a word. And finally, as the last camper took his cookie, he said, "Thank you." Promptly, the camp leader rewarded the child with another cookie, and he said, "You're welcome." The following night, he decided to start with that camper so that he might demonstrate what the child had learned for his cabin mates. And when the director gave out his carton of milk and cookie, he quickly put them aside, then held out his hand again, saying, "Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you." So, here's the problem. In a society that's based on equality, a reward for good behavior comes to be expected as a right. A child does not learn to behave cooperatively just because the situation calls for it, or because the family functions better when everybody follows the rules or pitches in. Instead, he develops a "what's in it for me" attitude, and that leads him to expect more and more rewards for positive behavior. It can become downright inflationary. That poor parent must then increase the value of the reward to keep it effective until they reach a point of frustration, and that frustration often leads to the use of a punishment. Punishment is a method designed to hurt a child, either physically or psychologically, in order to teach the child what to not do in the future. And there was a time when teachers thought that the best way to discourage students from giving wrong answers in class was to rap them across the knuckles with a ruler. And that method was pretty smartly abandoned when the conventional wisdom realized, hey, this doesn't work as a teaching technique. And what's more, it also produces unwanted side effects. And punishment, whether it's physical, like spanking or push-ups, or if it's psychological, like shaming or taking away privileges, it continues to be a popular method for a lot of parents because it pretty often works in the short term. But it's been handed down for centuries. And in the long run, hurting children in order to teach them positive behavior really makes no more sense than smacking them with a ruler for saying 1 + 1 = 3. It's a bad policy. Remember the side effects I just mentioned. When you hurt someone in a society that's based on equality, the hurt party becomes resentful. And not only that, but they also tend to conclude that they have the right to hurt you back. And children in that position, remember their brains are still under development and they lack that full supply of morality. They're often going to get their revenge through misbehavior that's much worse than what they did wrong in the first place. And they know that their parents, value And they know what can hurt us where it matters most. And if nothing else works, they can hurt us through their own failure. Rewards and punishment have no place among equals. Only a superior can give rewards and met out punishments, and only inferiors can receive them. And all in all, rewards and punishments as methods of child rearing are just holdovers from an earlier time. There are much more effective methods of discipline, and we're going to learn a little bit more about them in this continuing lesson. So do we spank or do we not spank? During an appearance on a TV news show, somebody was asked why they didn't believe spanking was a useful parenting method. And he said that spanking is a high-risk method of discipline. It's sort of like driving without a seatbelt. You might get away with it, but why take the chance? So here's a couple of good reasons not to spank. The first one is it's easy for an enraged parent to cross the line from spanking to abusing. That adrenaline rush that venting your frustrations and anger on a child can produce, that's almost like a high, and it becomes habit forming. It's almost not addictive. And unfortunately, by the time that the smoke clears, a lot of parents have crossed the line from spanking to hitting and shaking and slapping and other forms of child abuse. And that's why even parent educators who advocate spanking say to never spank while you're angry. Calm down before you approach your child or decide how to handle the problem. The second one is that spanking usually leads to more misbehavior. And that's a big problem with spanking, is that it does work for the immediate misbehavior. Kids are going to stop at this instant. But they're also going to resent the spanking. And afterwards, they're going to seek out conscious or unconscious ways to get even. And the third one is spanking models aggressive behavior. We know that kids that are spanked learn to handle problems with violence or the threat of violence. And others find that their parents are too big to get even with, so they take it out on other kids. And we have to teach kids that violence is only okay as a measure of restrained self-defense and never as a way to punish others for misbehavior. The fourth one is that spanking can damage your relationship with your child. When you're spanking, often you're creating a climate of hurt and revenge that undermines much of the good in the relationship. So why take that chance when there are better methods available? And then number 5, spanking is out of step with the times. Since the 1950s, the number of parents in the U.S. who spanked has dropped from over 95% back then to 50 or 60% in recent years. Even the American Pediatric Association has come out against spanking. Number 6 is that spanking often leaves the parent feeling guilty. And even before that societal shift in the spanking trends, a lot of parents sensed that something was not right about hurting a child for their own good, and they still felt guilty afterwards. Parents can't act with confidence when they intuitively know that their actions are off the mark. And then number 7, if spanking worked, parenting would be easy. When we ask groups of parents or professionals if they agree that parenting well is difficult, everybody raises their hands. And that's why parenting education is needed. Somebody took their family to the San Diego Zoo a while back, and they visited the gorilla habitat. And a mother gorilla was eating when a child gorilla began annoying her. She simply took a massive arm and backhanded the misbehaving child across the compound. It doesn't take a high-level intelligence to hit a child. If it worked, parenting would be easy, not difficult, because we could all do it. There must be more effective discipline in our complex, democratic society than there is in primitive societies of apes.